Well, continuing our study from the book of Ecclesiastes, we are still in the 5th chapter. We've begun and looked at the first 7 verses of the 5th chapter, and now we're going to start with the 8th, and we're going 8th verse of the 5th chapter. I'm going to go through the remainder of the chapter. So Solomon is going to talk about wealth and power and the pursuit of wealth and how it can get people into trouble that can even harm their families. And the things you're going to see here are things that are very similar to the things we see in our world today. So as Solomon said in another place, there's nothing new under the sun. And that is certainly the case. So we look here at verse 8, and he's going to talk about, power within a governmental structure. He says in verse 8, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over him. Now, what is he saying here? Well, first of all, he's giving us a situation where you have a governmental structure within a province. A province is a subsidiary government under the main government. Canada has provinces. We have in the United States, we have states. But they serve a similar purpose. They are a government underneath the main government, a more limited government. So if you see that, and you see within that province oppression of the poor, don't be surprised. Well, we see that kind of thing happening, and that kind of thing has happened all throughout history. But it's interesting the way he takes this, because he says, because for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over him. Now, I was reading a translation. I was reading one of the commentaries on it, and the commentator, who is Derek Kidner, who's very capable, was saying that really it should be translated with the sense of there's one higher official looking out for another. So it's the idea of having this bureaucracy, and there's oppression going on, and yet they're all kind of scratching each other's back and looking out for one another and covering for one another. The idea is. So he says, don't be surprised at that. Now, the idea of a bureaucracy is something that as long as you have government, you're going to have layers of officials that form what we call a bureaucracy. We certainly have that here in our country. And we have it within the states, where you just have one official after another, and it becomes inefficient for whatever reason. And you can have corruption in it. And the point he's making is there are many layers of government, many layers in which people can exercise corruption, and they can cover for one another. So he said, don't be surprised when you see the perversion of justice and the oppression of the poor, where you have this layered government. And so the idea, that he's working with is one he's been working with, is the pursuit of wealth. And that he'll continue this as we go further into this passage. We look at it. But when you think about why do people exercise, why do people do corruption? It's for personal gain. And in that case, the pursuit of wealth through corruption, not caring who you hurt. Now, this is something that's timeless. It is certainly went on in Solomon's day. It's going on in our day. We understand that. But then he says in verse 9, but this is gain for a land. In every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. Now that seems to be a little bit of a twist that he's saying here, but he talked about these one official corrupt and another official covering for him and that kind of thing. But he said this is the good thing. If you have the king who's committed to agriculture, then it's going to be an overall gain for the land, because he's going to form policies and he's going to enforce things such that the agriculture will be benefited, and if the agriculture is good, there's food for people, there's grapes for wine, and there's just a lot of good things, olive oil and all of these things. So he said it's gain for a land if the king is committed to cultivated fields. And in that day, where it was largely an agricultural society, that meant the king had his priorities right. He was not pursuing other things. So, yes, he was saying you may have this corruption going on, but at least if you've got a king that's got his priorities right, that's a gain overall. So we're going to go down a little bit further with this, and he's going to stay on this idea of money and become even more explicit with it. Verse 10, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money. Wow, that is certainly true. You'd think that people who have so much, they'd just be satisfied. Well, no, they tend to be very dissatisfied and tend to want more and more. He said, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. It's just a fleeting thing, wealth is. He said, those who desire it and those who love it, and we understand when he says he who loves money, he's not necessarily saying that it's just a rich person. A person may be very wealthy but have a correct idea of what wealth is about. But he said he who loves money, in other words, he who's pursuing money, he who wants more. He's not going to be satisfied even if he gets more. He's going to keep trying to get more and more. And he said that's vanity. It's fleeting because you're never going to be satisfied. If that's your desire, is to be satisfied by having the most stuff or the most money, you'll never be satisfied because there's always going to be the desire for more, and he's going to tell us some other things. Verse 11, when goods increase, they increase who eat them. So he says when you have more and more, you end up with more people around you that you're feeding and supplying and everything. You have an entourage. You have if you are a wealthy man and you've pursued this wealth, then you've probably established a company, or you have fields, or you have all of these variety of things to maintain that wealth and to keep it coming in. But that requires other people. So more people multiply that are going to consume that. He said, and what advantage has the owner but to see them with his eyes? And so if you get more, you're going to have more headaches, and you're going to have more responsibilities. You're going to have more who are wanting more of what you have. But then he says in verse 12, sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much. So when he says whether he eats little or much, which really goes down to whether he has little or much. Because if you eat a little, that's because you don't have enough money to buy a whole lot. So, but he said the laborer, the man who just works with his hands, the man who is just working for his living, he said his sleep is sweet. He doesn't have all those responsibilities. He's not worried about whether he's going to make enough money or whether he's going to have to feed everybody, or if he's dissatisfied because he's not making enough. He's just trying to get by. The laborer is. He works as hard as he can. He does all that he can, and his sleep is sweet. But let's see what he says about the other man. But the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. So the laborer may go to bed hungry because he just doesn't have much, but he sleeps well because he doesn't have a lot that's worrying him. But he says the full stomach of the rich won't let him sleep because he's constantly worried. He's worried if he's going to lose it. The man who's just focused on money. He's worried if he's going to lose it. He's going to worry if he's not making enough. He's worried about all the ones around him who are demanding more. And so he can't sleep. He doesn't enjoy his life even though he has great wealth. Whereas the laborer can just rest and go to sleep. So obviously the point he's making is that if you are loving money and pursuing wealth, you're going to have a lot of headaches along with it. And he will make a summation of this as we get to the end of this chapter. But he's going to go to another thing here in verse 13. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches are kept, by their owner to his hurt. And those riches were lost in a bad venture. Okay, here is someone that had money. And obviously he's not satisfied with the money, just what he has, because he's trying to go out and even make more. And it said that he kept the riches and then he lost them to a bad venture. There are some who want to try to make a killing, want to try to do better, and they take chances with their money rather than being wise with it, rather than being frugal and using your money wisely and maybe investing wisely, even though you may get a little less out of it. But he said this person wants to make it and loses the money in a bad venture. Now that's something that's happened to a lot of people. They had a desire to make a lot of money. They sought that wealth through some investments that were very risky because the opportunity for reward seemed to be great, but the risk was very high. And that's the nature of investing. Risk and reward. High risk, potential for high reward, but potential for loss too. And so that's what this man does. He loses it all. He says, and he is father of a son, and yet he has nothing in his hand. In other words, he has nothing to leave to his son. He's lost it all. He had a good bit of money. And if he had handled it wisely, he could have lived well and passed it on to his son. But instead, he wanted more and more. He went after a bad venture, a bad investment, and lost it all. And now his family is in bad shape, and he has nothing to give as an inheritance to his son. That's a sad story. And he says it's an evil I've seen. Verse 15, as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. He was born naked. He's going back to the grave naked because he lost it all through a lack of wisdom and a greed, a desire to have more. Verse 16, this also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger. So, what gain is there? Who toils for the wind? You remember that word vanity is fleeting. It's like the wind. And so that's kind of what he's saying. He has worked for vanity and for fleeting opportunities that went away. And it says in all his days, he eats in darkness. He's so afraid. He has no life. He's in vexation. He's in sickness and anger. The person who seeks after wealth and he makes wealth and money his goal is not going to have a happy life. He's not going to enjoy life because he's so afraid he won't make enough, or he's so afraid he's going to lose what he has. And he may be tempted to make bad ventures or bad investments. And so he's going to now kind of give us the moral of the story here. In verse 18, behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Now, this is a theme that Solomon has returned to several times. He said, what is good is to enjoy the life that God has given you. Enjoy the resources God has given you. Enjoy your family. Enjoy this time that God has given you on this earth. It's your lot. It's your allotment from God. because we don't know how long we're going to be here. Are we going to be here a short time? Or are we going to be here a long time? We don't know. Only God holds that within his hand. Only God knows what the times hold. So he says, enjoy your life. Don't be caught up in vexation of spirit over trying to get more and more. He goes on to say, verse 19, everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is his gift of God, is the gift of God. So he says, if you have wealth, God has given you wealth. God has given you possessions. He says, enjoy them and accept this as God's gift. Rather than having the dissatisfied attitude is, I don't have enough and I need more. And I'm going to have a vexation in my life because I'm just afraid I'm going to lose it. Whatever it is that God has given you, whether it's little or much, enjoy that. See it as God's gift. Enjoy your family, because a lot of times people who are pursuing wealth, they ignore their families. And they end up losing their families and sometimes losing their wealth too. But he says, enjoy this life God's given you. And this book of Ecclesiastes is all about how to live life wisely. How to live life in a way that glorifies God and is good for the person. God desires us to have the good life. But the good life is not what the world says it is. The world says, oh, you need pleasures, you need all these things, you need to do all these things. No. You need to enjoy what God has given. That's happiness. That's joy. And to be able to go to bed at night and sleep well, not because you're worried all the time. And he goes on and closes this out. Verse 20, for he will not much remember. He says, enjoy this life. Why? For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with the joy in his heart. The one who seeks good and seeks to enjoy the blessings God has given is not going to be too concerned about everything. He's going to be so preoccupied with the good life he has of his life, his family, and the good things God has given. And that's what life is about. That's what God wants us to have. He doesn't want us to be constantly seeking more and more because God has given us what we need. And let us remember that. God's blessings, the scripture says, the blessings of God make rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. So think about that. Think about your life and think about the goodness God has given you and enjoy that. So I hope this has been a blessing to you today. It's a wonderful passage, and it gives us a lot to think about. So my prayer is that you will have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.